So the DLR, also known as the Docklands Light Railway, is a light rail system in London that feels like its own metro network. Built in the 1980s with the goals of regenerating the Docklands at a low cost with the potential of future expansions. But did it achieve these aims? In this video we're going to discuss regeneration, cost, scalability and more to determine whether the DLR was worth it. Let's start with the first and most important aim of the DLR, regeneration. So prior to the DLR, the Docklands was quite a derelict area, with it once being a significant port for London, but it became redundant as advancements in cargo technology meant the port had been moved to Tilbury. So there was a desire to repurpose this land that was so close to the city centre. And what better way to spark up regeneration than a new transport link? And from a variety of different proposals, the DLR was chosen as the catalyst for this regeneration. The DLR was one of the first examples of transit-oriented development, which saw urban and dense development occur around public transportation modes. Specifically at Canary Wharf, which is one of the biggest regeneration sites out of all the locations on the network. With mass development occurring here, highlighting the benefits of building transport infrastructure to promote regeneration. This then ignited the construction of various other extensions on the DLR network, such as the Bank extension in 1991, Beckton extension in 1994, Lewisham extension in 1999, London City Airport extension in 2005, Woolwich Arsenal extension in 2009, and the Stratford International extension in 2011, unlocking new areas for housing, jobs and developments. However, the DLR's regeneration hasn't been all positive. As much as regeneration has occurred in various locations on the DLR network, it has been centred around Canary Wharf. In addition, it has somewhat failed to connect and help regenerate certain areas that really need it, such as Thamesmead. So in terms of regeneration, the DLR did well in achieving its goal. It had turned an abandoned and derelict Docklands into one of London's major financial districts, with it continuing to support growth in other areas such as Stratford and Woolwich. However, the development is kind of Canary Wharf centric, but if the extension to Thamesmead finally gets built, it'll be another area where the DLR has assisted in the regeneration of an area. Of course, regeneration is one thing, but none of that would have mattered if the project wasn't affordable. That brings us to the second aim, cost. So, was the DLR good value for money? Usually that will be determined by a CBA or a cost-benefit analysis. This factors in construction costs, maintenance costs, passenger benefits, environmental benefits, and various other factors to determine whether the piece of infrastructure is worth the investment. But when the original DLR was proposed, CBAs weren't really incorporated into public transportation schemes. So it was determined as worthwhile as it was presented as a fast and cheap way to get public transportation into the Docklands. To put it in perspective, the original DLR was estimated at £77 million, whereas the alternative, which was a tube line, was estimated at upwards of £100 million. Quite a difference. And you may be thinking, how are they able to cost this at such a lower price compared to a tube line? Well, they ensured to implement some core cost-saving designs. The first was implementing automated driverless trains. This cuts down costs as train drivers are not required on each vehicle, with there being passenger service agents on trains instead, who don't require the same extensive and expensive training that train drivers need, in addition to their salaries being lower because of this. The DLR also saw big cost savings because of the way it was built. Being mostly above ground and on viaducts resulted in two major cost benefits. One is that the construction costs are lower in comparison to a network that is mostly tunnelled. The second reason is UK law. All subsurface railway stations must be staffed, but above ground stations don't fall under those same strict safety rules. So most DLR stations can legally run without being staffed. This then leads to the next cost saving technique, which is the application of a proof of payment system instead of a ticket barrier system. This is a much cheaper system to implement, as the card readers at stations don't require staff there to man them, unlike ticket barriers, keeping labour costs low. They do have revenue officers on the network alongside passenger service agents to carry out ticket checks. But the overall cost of this is still far lower than having to operate every station with ticket barriers and staff. Another way they kept costs low was utilising light rail instead of heavy rail. Light rail are akin to trams and streetcars, and they tend to be lighter vehicles, whereas heavy rail are more traditional trains and they are much heavier. The use of lighter trains means it's cheaper to buy and maintain, and they consume much less energy than a heavy rail train. Additionally, using light rail trains meant it was easier to repurpose existing railway lines for the DLR. The DLR uses quite a few existing railway right-of-ways, which has a lot of old infrastructure. Repurposing it for the DLR meant it required less expensive restructuring compared to a heavy rail system. And the success of these cost savings meant further developments on the DLR were more likely to get greenlit. However, the cost savings did mean that they kind of underbuilt the service. Most stations had quite short platforms, only allowing for 1 to 2 car trains. The lack of future-proofing meant the inevitable extensions of these platforms was a costly upgrade. So yes, the low cost meant it was built fast, but it meant expensive, inevitable retrofits. Now, being cheap and practical got the DLR built, but the question is, could it keep up with London as the city grew? That's where scalability and legacy come in. So, could the DLR grow with London, and what's its long-term impact? The DLR has scaled far beyond its 1980s beginnings, from just 15 stations in 1987 to 45 stations today, with the constant extensions to different areas really proving the DLR's adaptability. Another way scalability is highlighted on the DLR is on the platforms and the increased train capacity. Due to the initial higher than expected demand, platforms had to be extended to allow for longer trains. Additionally, new trains have been ordered which will see full walk-through carriages for the first time on the DLR, in addition to increasing the overall capacity. Another way the DLR shows its scalability is its frequency. It's been advanced so much to have one of the highest frequencies on a train in London, with trains running every 3 to 4 minutes in the peak and every 10 to 15 minutes in the off-peak and weekends. So the DLR clearly has great scalability, but what is the DLR's legacy? So in the past, it was a huge catalyst in shaping the development in the Docklands. Present day is seen as a novelty mode of transport, where you can get great views whilst travelling on the train, and where kids and adults run to the front seat to get a glimpse of what it's like to be a train driver, being an iconic experience that everyone has to enjoy, at least once. And the future sees new trains being added to the network, increasing capacity, the extension to Thamesmead which will help regenerate this area and properly connect it to the Docklands, and maybe even the naming of the different lines, like the Overground lines, as the network continues to expand. It has scaled impressively, but not without its limits, with its legacy being both economical and cultural. So, was the DLR worth it? The DLR is bigger than anyone could have imagined, starting with a couple lines to aid in connecting this previously disconnected area of London to a large metro network, becoming a crucial part of London's transport network. What do you think of the DLR, and do you think it was a worthwhile investment? Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh lovely DLR, you allow me to travel so far. There's no need for a car when you have the keys to my heart.